The smell of stale coffee and unwashed laundry was a constant ghost in the 2nd Division supply yard, a scent that usually blended into the background noise of distant engines and shuffling boots. But today, the stench of Sergeant Davis's condescension cut through everything. Davis, a man whose uniform looked pressed by divine intervention and whose face was perpetually set in an expression of self-satisfied obstruction, leaned back against a stack of packaged MREs, his arms crossed over a chest padded by desk work, not body armor. "Cabo Silva," he droned, articulating the lower-ranking designation with a mocking emphasis that implied she barely rated the title of Cabo, much less soldier. "We've been over this. The requisition for the industrial floor wax, item 745B, has been filed incorrectly. You put Q2 where the Q4 designation should be. Standard operating procedure, Silva. The help needs to follow the rules." Cabo Silva, her utility uniform faded and dusted with the perpetual film of base camp grit, shifted the worn wooden handle of the mop she carried. Her gloves, thick and stained with bleach and oil, were standard issue, but her hands moved with an economy of motion that belied the simplicity of her task. She needed the wax. The hangar floor, where visiting dignitaries were expected later that week, was a mosaic of oil slicks and boot prints. "Sergeant," she replied, her voice low and even, utterly devoid of inflection. It was the voice of someone who had learned the hard lesson that arguing with incompetence only prolongs the agony. "The Q2 designation covers the high-gloss polymer specifically requested by the maintenance chief. Q4 is the standard issue sealant, which is inadequate for this environment." Davis smirked, a slow, ugly curving of his lips that exposed teeth too white for the setting. "Is that so? Well, Corporal, or rather, Cabo, I'm the one who issues the P forms, not the one scrubbing the grease traps. And my form says Q4. So, unless you want to spend the next week pushing that pitiful piece of cotton around a floor that looks like the bottom of a latrine, you'll resubmit the paperwork correctly, starting with an apology for wasting my time." He tapped the desk with a manicured finger, enjoying the slow burn of her humiliation. "Now get out of my sight, and don't come back until you learn how to address a non-commissioned officer properly." Silva didn't flinch. She simply nodded, a slow dip of the head that might have been submission or resignation. She turned, the mop handle scraping faintly on the concrete floor, the sound insignificant against the roar of a nearby transport helicopter. The injustice of it, the deliberate obstruction of necessary work, the petty abuse of minor power, was a familiar weight. She had carried far heavier burdens. As she stepped out of the blinding fluorescent light of the supply office and into the arid heat of the main motor pool, her gaze drifted down to her hands. They were raw, perpetually nicked and scarred by brushes with industrial cleaners and sharp metal edges. But beneath the dirt, a ghost of memory sparked, a memory of different scars, different metal, a different kind of duty. The weight of the mop handle suddenly dissolved, replaced by the familiar cold density of a fully integrated anti-materiel precision rifle, the Barrett M107A1. It had been 3 years since she last cycled around through its chamber, but the memory was instant, visceral. The sound of the bolt slamming home was the purest form of finality she had ever known. She wasn't Cabo Silva, the base janitor. She was Corporal Erica Silva, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, and the only reason she was pushing a mop was that the trauma surgeons had given her a choice: mop or medical discharge. She chose the mop. The discharge felt too much like admitting defeat. The transition from the supply yard noise to the agonizing silence of the past was immediate and total. The air in the Arghandab Valley had always smelled like pulverized sandstone and fear. At Forward Operating Base Chapman, the heat wasn't just physical. It was an oppressive, invisible blanket that pressed the oxygen out of the air and squeezed the sanity from every soldier. For Corporal Silva, positioned almost 1,000 meters outside the wire, hugging the baked earth of a desolate ridgeline, the heat was just another variable in the complex equation of thermodynamics and ballistics. Her camouflage was meticulously applied, broken up with fragments of local rock and scrub. She was invisible, a ghost in the high desert terrain. Below her, protected by kilometers of unforgiving terrain and the sheer mathematical precision of her skill, lay the main convoy route, vital, vulnerable, and constantly surveilled. Her weapon, the M107A1, rested on a heavy bipod, its muzzle brake a formidable piece of engineering designed to tame the colossal energy of the 50 BMG round. This wasn't a rifle. It was a crew-served weapon designed to eliminate targets up to 2,000 meters away, or to destroy enemy light vehicles and communications equipment with equal disregard. Silva sighted down the Leupold Mark IV scope, the mil-dot reticle sharp and luminous against the heat haze. She wasn't looking for standard insurgents. She was hunting a different kind of ghost. The VBIED, Vehicle-Borne Improvised Explosive Device, triggers, usually a motorcycle or an ancient Toyota pickup, driven by someone disposable. Her job was to stop the threat before it became a detonation. She closed her left eye, using her right to focus entirely on the scope. Her breathing slowed to the mandatory pause between heartbeats, the moment of perfect physiological stillness. The variables, always the variables. Distance, 1,840 meters to the central choke point of the wadi. Altitude and temperature. The air density was thin, meaning the bullet would initially travel faster, but the heat shimmering off the valley floor created optical distortion, the dreaded thermal mirage, making precise location difficult. She had to shoot through the shimmering. Wind, mild crosswind, 6 knots, variable gusting. Reading 3 o'clock. A slight push from the right. Standard windage adjustments were already dialed into the turret, but the most crucial adjustment, the one that separated the competent shooter from the true masters, was the Coriolis effect. At these extreme ranges, the rotation of the Earth beneath the flight path of the bullet could not be ignored. Since FOB Chapman was near the 31st parallel north, the rotational velocity was significant. Over the 2.5 seconds the 50 cal projectile would spend in the air, the target would move fractionally, and the Earth itself would spin. Silva had spent weeks calculating the specific Coriolis drift for this latitude. Her current data mandated a tiny, almost imperceptible hold-off to the right, less than 4 inches at the target distance, but absolutely critical for a successful interception. If the bullet missed the engine block and hit the cabin, the explosive might still detonate. She held the 0. Her muscles were rigid, but her trigger finger was isolated, weightless. She exhaled slowly, watching the slight sway of the crosshairs against the background dust. Then, she saw it, a battered blue motorcycle, moving fast, too fast, heading toward the main convoy formation currently winding through the canyon. The rider was wearing a black jacket and moved with the telltale jerky urgency of a man who knew he was riding toward his death. Silva ignored the rider. She focused on the center mass of the engine. Focus. Relax. Press. The recoil of the 50 cal round was immediate and brutal, a massive physical concussion that seemed to strike her chest and shoulder simultaneously, driving her back into the dirt. The muzzle flash, even with the compensator, was blinding, kicking up a plume of dust that temporarily obscured the view. But she didn't lift her head. Her training was absolute. She remained locked on the impact point, waiting for the telltale splash of the round. A moment later, through the ringing in her ears and the settling dust, her spotter, Sergeant First Class Morales, whispered, his voice cracking slightly with admiration. Dead center. Engine block exploded. Target neutralized. Beautiful, Silva. Goddamn beautiful. The bike wobbled, then pitched sideways, collapsing into a cloud of dust. No secondary explosion. The threat was eliminated. For a brief, precious moment, the world was silent again. That silence, the immediate aftermath of successful violence, was the purest high she knew. It meant her calculations were correct. It meant lives had been saved. But the relative peace of that day was a cruel deception. 2 months later, the serenity evaporated entirely. They were deployed on a quick extraction mission near the notoriously unstable area surrounding the Sorobi district, supporting a small, embedded Special Forces team. Corporal Silva was not on a high-ground perch. She was operating as overwatch for the extraction element, carrying not the Barrett, but an HK-416, the standard assault rifle, optimized for close to mid-range engagement. The air was thick with humidity, the terrain less dust and more overgrown vineyards and mud brick compounds. This was close quarters, high-risk work. The environment felt claustrophobic, the angles of fire restricted, the threat immediate and unpredictable. The ambush was textbook, a synchronized hammer and anvil attack. It started with the sickening thud of a shaped charge detonating beneath the lead Humvee. Not an IED designed for massive collateral damage, but an EFP, explosively formed penetrator, designed to pierce armor, instantly vaporizing the driver and rocking the rest of the element to their core. The subsequent chaos was a symphony of hell. Machine gun fire erupted from 3 different locations, from a compound wall, a shallow irrigation ditch, and the roof of a small mosque, used against all rules of engagement, but entirely expected. Rounds impacted the convoy vehicles with the sickening sharp thwack of high-velocity copper. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the team leader, a promising young officer on his first combat deployment, froze. He was a tactician, an academic soldier, and the immediate, overwhelming pressure of kinetic action locked him into a state of shock, his radio handset slipping from his grasp. Sergeant Morales, Silva's spotter and mentor, took immediate control, issuing rapid-fire commands. But fate intervened with brutal efficiency. A single well-aimed sniper round, not theirs, found Morales' temple. He dropped without a sound, his blood blooming instantly on the mud. In the span of 4 seconds, the command structure dissolved. They were pinned, disoriented, and rapidly being surrounded. Corporal Silva was positioned 20 meters behind the lead vehicle, providing rear security. When the firing started, the instinct forged over years of brutal training took over. There was no thought, only action. Her focus narrowed, everything external becoming blurry, muffled, except for the muzzle flashes of the enemy and the frantic, shallow breaths of her remaining squad mates. 4 soldiers were in immediate, life-threatening danger. 1. The medic, Specialist Harris, trapped behind the smoking ruin of the lead Humvee, exposed to concentrated fire from the compound wall. He was screaming, unable to reach his medkit, his left leg already peppered with shrapnel. 2. Lieutenant Hayes, still frozen, providing a massive target of opportunity, standing near the flank of the second vehicle. 3. Private Johnson and Private Lewis, the 2 youngest members, attempting to lay down suppressive fire, but completely exposed in the open ground near the irrigation ditch, firing wildly and ineffectively. Silva dropped to a low crouch, adjusting her HK-416's fire selector to semi-automatic. She had no time for sustained suppressive fire. She needed surgical precision, instantly. Her world became a complex targeting system. She ignored the volume of fire and focused on the source. First target, the compound wall. This position held the highest concentration of enemy fire, likely a PKM machine gunner. Silva estimated the distance, 75 meters. Too close for comfort, but the 5.56 round was devastating at this range. She saw the flash, held her breath, and engaged the burst. Click, click, click. 3 rounds. The machine gun fire immediately ceased. Through the dust, she saw the silhouette slump forward over the wall. The immediate threat to Harris was neutralized. Second target, the irrigation ditch. This was harder. The enemy was using the ditch cover expertly. She could only see the small puffs of dust kicked up by their muzzles. She knew they were aiming for the lieutenant. She swung the .416 left, adjusting her stance. She needed to shoot low, aiming for the few inches of exposed earth where the muzzle flashes originated. This wasn't a headshot. It was a shot designed to disable the enemy position, forcing them to retreat or expose themselves further. Click, click. 2 rounds, fired almost simultaneously. A guttural scream echoed from the ditch. The suppressive fire on Johnson and Lewis vanished. Third target, the rooftop sniper, the most dangerous threat. This shooter was positioned high, using cover, and had already claimed Morales. Silva could only see the slightest shimmer around a patch of loose tiling on the mosque roof, indicating a muzzle or an optic. The range was roughly 150 meters, a challenging shot for iron sights, but she was using her ACOG, calibrated perfectly. She dropped her pulse rate mentally, bringing herself back to the cold mathematics of the Barrett, even though she held the smaller rifle. She calculated the trajectory. Slight incline, no major wind. She found the shimmer, centered the chevron, and held steady. Click. 1 round. The deliberate heavy weight of the shot, a prayer disguised as physics. The tiling on the roof shattered, followed by a heavy wet thud as the body rolled off the roof edge and disappeared. In less than 15 seconds, the entire ambush element targeting the convoy's core had been silenced by 5 rounds. The immediate, overwhelming noise of the attack ceased, replaced by a strange, throbbing silence, a silence heavy with the ringing in her ears, the smell of cordite and pulverized mud, and the realization that the danger was far from over. She had bought them time, but the enemy was still out there, regrouping. Lieutenant Hayes finally broke his trance. He looked wildly around, saw Morales bleeding out, saw the destruction, and then his eyes landed on Corporal Silva, who was already running, not toward cover, but toward Specialist Harris. "Medic!" Silva screamed, reaching Harris, pulling him clear of the wreckage. Her voice, usually soft, was raw and commanding. "Lewis! Johnson! Suppressive fire on that tree line! Hayes, get on the horn! Get us air support now!" The lieutenant, ashamed and galvanized by her decisiveness, scrambled for the radio, repeating her commands, verbatim. Silva stabilized Harris, using the knowledge she had absorbed over countless training sessions. She tourniqueted his leg, ignoring the sting of shrapnel in her own forearm, a minor injury she wouldn't even register until they were back at base. For the next 45 minutes, she directed the defense. She was the radio operator, the medic, the tactical commander, and the precision marksman, all simultaneously. She managed the suppressive fire, guided the injured soldiers into safe cover, and used hand signals to maintain a tight perimeter until the dust-off helicopters finally arrived, their rotors kicking up a storm of dirt that signaled salvation. She was the last one on the bird, having dragged Morales' body aboard, refusing to leave him behind. Later, the after-action report confirmed it. Corporal Erica Silva's actions saved the lives of Lieutenant Hayes, Specialist Harris, Private Johnson, and Private Lewis. Her 5 shots, fired under immense duress and in complete vacuum of command, had dismantled the primary ambush positions. The subsequent weeks were a blur of debriefings, mandatory psychiatric evaluations, and the relentless, suffocating realization of what she had witnessed. Morales' lifeless face, the smell of burnt flesh, the raw screaming of Harris. She was awarded the Medal of Valor for her gallantry in action, along with the Purple Heart for the shrapnel wound. The citations were heavily classified, describing an almost inhuman level of precision and command control under fire. But the medals were lead weights. The constant pressure of PTSD, the sudden terror triggered by loud noises, the intrusive images of Morales' death, broke her spirit, if not her will. She started making mistakes in simple logistical tasks. Her hands, once steady enough to account for the Earth's spin, now occasionally trembled uncontrollably. When the medical review board offered her the option, full discharge with honors or remaining on active duty in a non-combat, non-sensitive maintenance role, she chose to stay. She couldn't leave the uniform. It was the only skin she knew. But she needed the anonymity, the dull routine, the absolute lack of high-stakes decisions. She traded the M107A1 and the HK416 for a mop and a bucket. Corporal Erica Silva became Cabo Silva, the base janitor, hiding her valor behind bleach fumes and industrial grime, performing penance for the lives she couldn't save, namely, Morales. The mop was heavy, but the memories were heavier. The present rushed back in, hitting her with the force of an unexpected flashbang. Cabo Silva stood just outside the supply bay door, the desert sun hot on the back of her neck. The faint aroma of engine oil returned, eclipsing the cordite and dust of Cerobi. The mop handle felt flimsy and useless in her hands. She was about to turn toward the maintenance bay to wait out Sergeant Davis's petty tyranny, intending to resubmit the form tomorrow and endure another day of the sticky, inadequate Q4 sealant, when the supply sergeant's voice sliced through the air again, louder this time, directed at someone else entering the bay. "Look at this, Captain," Davis said, his voice dripping with faux camaraderie. "We have the maintenance element attempting to process incorrect paperwork. I swear, the standards keep slipping. We're paying these people to push dirt around, and they can't even fill out a form that requires 5 minutes of basic thought." Davis had crossed the line. He wasn't just being difficult, he was actively denigrating her in front of a senior officer, confirming his belief that her role, and by extension her presence in the military, was fundamentally worthless. Silva tightened her grip on the mop handle, her jaw clenching. She felt the familiar, cold flicker of professional rage that used to precede the calculated squeeze of a precision trigger. She kept her eyes down. Getting into a confrontation with Davis would only confirm his prejudice and jeopardize her precarious status. The officer Davis addressed was not a captain, but a Chief Warrant Officer 3, and not just any CW3. He was massive, not merely tall, but built with the coiled functional density of a predator. His uniform was dark, immaculate, and covered in patches that spoke of long, deep service in the shadows, master parachutist wings, combat diver insignia, and a subtle dark green tab indicating his membership in a unit that specialized in solving problems the conventional military couldn't even acknowledge existed. This was CW3 Kincaid, an operator, a ghost. Kincaid had stepped into the supply room looking for specialized ordnance documentation. He didn't speak immediately. He merely turned his head toward the source of Davis's loud, obnoxious complaint. His eyes, framed by the deep shadows of fatigue and intense focus, settled on Silva. They were flat, cold, and utterly penetrating. He looked through the dirty uniform, past the mop, and into the core of the person standing there. Davis, encouraged by the CW3's silence, continued his diatribe, oblivious to the atmosphere change. Honestly, the base needs to hire actual civilian contractors for this sort of substandard custodial work. Wasting perfectly good combat slots on... Sergeant, Kincaid's voice cut in. It wasn't shouted, but delivered at a low frequency that demanded attention. It was the sound of steel being honed. Is there a problem with the service member's requisition? Davis straightened, puffing out his chest. Yes, Chief. She's requesting Q2 high polymer wax, but the standard protocol is Q4. She's too incompetent to follow the manual. Kincaid didn't look at the paperwork. He kept his gaze locked on Silva. Cabo, Kincaid said, the designation sounding formal and respectful when he used it. Approach. Silva hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped back into the bay, the soles of her worn boots scuffing the floor. Kincaid took a single measured step, placing himself directly between Davis and Silva. His presence was like dropping a lid curtain in the room. Cabo Silva, Kincaid repeated. Look at me. She lifted her eyes. They met his. He wasn't judging her cleaning ability. He was running an internal diagnostic. Then Kincaid shifted his focus to the collar of Silva's uniform. His gaze was slow, meticulous. He wasn't looking for rank insignia. He was looking for the ribbons and the badges. Davis started to interrupt. Chief, with respect, I need to get back to my inventory. Kincaid raised a hand. A heavy, scarred hand. A gesture that instantly silenced the sergeant more effectively than any shouted command. Kincaid then began to read, his voice taking on a formal recitation tone, as if reading from a citation scroll at a high-level ceremony. The sound was stark against the sudden heavy silence of the supply depot. Combat infantryman badge, he began, nodding slightly, acknowledging the foundational qualification. Standard issue. Understood. He moved to the ribbon rack, itemizing each line with clinical precision, his voice a hammer falling on cold iron. The Purple Heart, he stated flatly, indicating that her wound was real, earned in fire. The Army Commendation Medal with V device, he continued, the V standing for valor, indicating an act of immediate heroism performed under direct enemy fire. Davis shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the seriousness of the citation, but still trying to rationalize it away as a common decoration. Then Kincaid paused, his gaze fixed on a thin, almost invisible ribbon placed lower on the rack, a decoration so rare and usually so protected by classification that many desk-bound personnel wouldn't even recognize its weight. And finally, Kincaid's voice dropped, slowing down further, giving each syllable the weight of a stone inscription. The Distinguished Service Cross, commonly referred to as the Medal of Valor, for extreme gallantry and risk of life in action against an enemy of the United States. Kincaid lifted his head, his eyes burning into Silva's. The dirty mop, the faded uniform, they dissolved. All Kincaid saw was the ghost of the warrior who had held the line when the line broke. He saw the cold calculation of the sniper, the decisive commander, the soldier who had bled for 4 others. Davis was pale, visibly trembling now. He recognized the Distinguished Service Cross. Every man who has ever worn a uniform knows what that means. It wasn't a thank you. It was testimony of survival where others failed, an act that bordered on the mythic. He was staring at the actual service record of the woman he had just called substandard help. Kincaid didn't speak to Davis. He spoke only to Silva. Corporal Silva, Kincaid said, formally correcting the petty rank designation. Your orders are not to scrub floors. Your orders are to maintain the structural and sanitary integrity of this installation. You need the correct tools for the mission, and Q2 is clearly superior for the high-traffic polymer environment of the main hangar. He looked toward Davis, his expression lethal. Sergeant, you will issue the Q2 immediately. You will apologize to the corporal for the disruption of her mission readiness, and you will ensure that for the remainder of her assignment here, her requisitions are handled with the courtesy and professionalism due to a decorated combat veteran. Davis stammered, his face ash-gray. Yes, Chief, Corporal. I apologize. I didn't realize the extent of your service. I will process the Q2 immediately. Kincaid nodded curtly, but the confrontation was not yet finished. He stepped back, turning toward the heavy transit case he had brought into the supply room. He unlatched the heavy clasps, revealing the contents resting within custom-cut foam, his weapon. It was an HK-416, the barrel shortened slightly, optimized for close protection and rapid deployment, but heavily customized. It was a dark, intimidating masterpiece of German engineering and American modification. Its optics perfectly zeroed, its action slick with specialized lubricants, its stock etched with the subtle marks of years of continuous, high-intensity use. This was his instrument, the tool of his trade, and for an operator, it was sacred, rarely touched by unauthorized hands. Kincaid lifted the .416 out of the case. The rifle was heavy, balanced, and deadly quiet. The room held its breath. He walked toward Corporal Silva, stopping directly in front of her. Davis watched, eyes wide with incomprehension and growing dread. Kincaid extended the rifle, muzzle down, grip forward. It was a gesture of profound respect, an acknowledgement of equal, if not superior, warrior status. "Corporal Silva," Kincaid said, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "I know that weapon. I know what you did at Sorobi. The only reason a soldier like you is pushing a mop is because you choose to, and your choice demands respect." He pushed the rifle into her hands. "Hold this for a moment, just so you remember what cold steel feels like when it's not rusted by cleaning chemicals." Silva's scarred, bleach-worn hands instinctively accepted the weight. The cold metal stock settled into her grasp with a shocking, intimate familiarity. The texture of the polymer pistol grip, the precise, low-resistance weight of the trigger assembly. It was home. The mop clattered forgotten to the floor. For that frozen moment, with CW3 Kincaid's sacred rifle in her hands, Corporal Erica Silva was no longer the janitor. She was the ghost on the ridgeline, the force that saved 4 lives, the cold calculus of lethal precision. Davis watched the entire slow-motion exchange, the transfer of the highest possible professional respect. He saw the light return to Silva's eyes, the faint but unmistakable flicker of the warrior spirit. Davis realized he hadn't just insulted a low-ranking soldier, he had desecrated a monument. His career in logistics, perhaps even his time in the military, was effectively terminated by the silent, judging stare of CW3 Kincaid and the chilling evidence of the Medal of Valor worn by the woman holding the cleaning mop. Kincaid took the rifle back, securing it carefully. "Go get your wax, Corporal," Kincaid ordered. "And next time, if anyone questions your ability or your mission, refer them to me." Silva simply nodded. She didn't thank Kincaid. They both understood that this exchange transcended gratitude. It was validation. She bent down, picked up her mop, and walked out, the ghost of the M107A1, now resting comfortably beside the weight of the HK-416 in her memory. She was Cabo Silva again, but the knowledge of who she truly was had been publicly affirmed. Davis stood paralyzed, staring at the empty space where the corporal had been, then looked miserably at the CW3, who regarded him with profound contempt. "Sergeant," Kincaid said finally, his voice hard, "clean up your supply yard. It's filthier than an Afghan latrine. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments."